Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Blue Beetle. The synopsis on IMDb reads, an alien scarab chooses college graduate Jaime Reyes to be its symbiotic host, bestowing the teenager with a suit of armor that's capable of extraordinary and unpredictable powers, forever changing his destiny as he becomes the superhero known as Blue Beetle. All right, so what does this basic thing feel like? I am, by the way, a big fan. Well, not a huge fan, but a solid medium to large-sized fan of the Jaime Reyes iteration of Blue Beetle from DC Comics in years past. Was definitely interested in checking this one out. Saw in the trailer that maybe it was going to be having a different flavor than both past DC movies and more recent Marvel movies, and so I was really curious to see what the final product would be like, and I actually would describe it as a bit MCU-ish in the amount of humor, but the humor does have a different flavor, not one that really works for me. The jokes are mostly based on quirks of Jaime's family members, and I feel like at least a couple of those characters are steadily dialed up to 9 or 10 in volume at all times, especially George Lopez as Uncle Rudy and Jaime's grandmother. Instead of Marvel's kind of ironic, witty banter, Blue Beetle's humor often feels silly and almost the flavor I would expect from like a PG family movie made for parents and young kids. There are some genuinely grounded, heartfelt moments, but they're quickly wiped away by what feels like cliche dialogue, writing, or moments to me, or comedic scenes that just follow up and overwhelm the drama before it has a chance to really settle and sit with me and let me feel the weight of it for a significant amount of time. And that's especially the case in a tragic event that everyone recovers from and goes back to smiles and joking way, way too quickly. The villain is very one note, I thought, and not at all motivated in a relatable way. It's basically the female version of a mustache-twirling black hat villain played by Susan Sarandon. There is plenty of action, though, and the Blue Beetle alien armor symbiote thing does a variety of cool things that are fun to watch, with a few nice surprises here and there. I suspect that this movie was primarily made with teenagers in mind, and I think that audience specifically is most likely to connect with this one. Ted Kord, in the comics, the Blue Beetle before Jaime, haunts this movie, without being seen, and definitely seems planned for a sequel story. My hope is that a sequel under James Gunn's new DC universe will be greenlit, but also get a course correction in tone that retains comedic fun with less of the specific silly flavor that it has, and adds some weight that is permitted to kind of stick around and be felt for a little bit longer. As far as the cast goes, Xolo Maridueña felt solid and likable to me as Jaime Reyes, who becomes Blue Beetle, and the actors playing his family and his love interest all felt, fitting enough. But George Lopez's performance felt dialed up to max volume, as I said earlier, too often for me, and his punchlines also felt too straightforward for me, but some of that is definitely the writing, not just the delivery. As far as the stunts and visuals, I thought that for this type of movie, the effects were great, and the overall movie had some of the high contrast look of other DC movies that I like when compared to the more low contrast, almost kind of hazy look of some of the Marvel movies. But Blue Beetle also leans into 80s trends in its color, in its lighting, that just kind of felt a bit, trendy to me. Now, granted, there are story elements that tie this movie to the 1980s, so I think it's justifiable in some ways, but it still felt trend-chasing more than trend-setting. And while the action and spectacle was good, the enemy design for Omac, Beetle's primary physical nemesis in this movie, was a lot more generic-looking than its really striking design in the comic book source material. And all the spectacle in the world, just becomes an overly long fireworks display to me if the weight and stakes are not something I'm feeling. So my investment in the spectacular action wasn't near what I would like it to be. As far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? There's a few things going on. There's questions of purpose and meaning, The family is obviously coming from a Catholic background, at least culturally. They've got a painting of Mary in there, but in their house. But I thought a few times, like, man, if they're close, they're culturally at least positioned to have access to some truths that would be really valuable to people that are struggling with purpose and facing financial troubles and just feeling beaten down by life. But the characters are kind of treading water and not really quite arriving at some really helpful answers that are within reach. I think if they were engaging in the truths that they're already kind of connected to, because of at least a cultural connection to some form of Catholic faith anyway. So, but no, I think actually the political or social agenda as a theme will maybe come across as laid on too thick for some. I thought it's really cool to have a superhero with a Latino cultural backdrop and a Latino family heavily involved in the story, representing the culture, the heritage. I actually, from the trailers, I was like, oh, whoa, I wonder if this will be to Latino culture what Black Panther felt like it was to me for Black culture. I was like totally on board for that and just embracing that different flavor. And there was certainly some flavor from the culture, I think, that came with that. But on top of that, they're also really piling on themes about immigration and economic status, with a villain who's like a white corporate CEO that cares nothing for people. And so they're playing into kind of some of these extreme cliches and stereotypes and stuff. And I think that for those in a specific demographic, these themes and the way they're handled here are probably going to create maybe an energizing experience. They're really going to resonate and say, yeah, man, that's really frustrating. And I connect with what the Reyes family is experiencing. But I also think there's potential for fires of anger to be stoked that encourage viewers in that mental space and that emotional space to mentally dehumanize and villainize those in their lives whom they see as their oppressors in a similar way to how they have felt dehumanized. When it comes to representing social issues with complex and contested elements, it doesn't help our conversations or discovery of solutions when one party in the equation is represented in caricature only. I'm not saying that I am like siding with corporate America and CEOs and stuff like that. Not at all. But the representation of them, I don't think helps us discover and talk about solutions to those problems. It's just kind of like representing the problem and how people feel about it, and then that's turned into anger. Anger is turned into force, which ultimately that gets modified in the movie to love having greater value than anger. And so I did appreciate that. But for a while, man, there was anger that was really driving the hero and his surrounding supporting cast that we were meant to be on board with. And I think it's really important for each of us to try and truly understand those we strongly disagree with. Otherwise, we only add fuel to the fires of counterproductive expression, especially when it comes to what we are saying about these kinds of issues on social media. All right, I have no idea what your tastes are, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, wait on this one. Rent it on Blu-ray when you feel like, there's nothing really else to do or watch that's really, pulling at you for your free time that night. Then rent this one at Redbox for a couple bucks. It's a solid introduction to a character that you are already invested in from the comics. You're going to enjoy seeing the visual representations of this character that you are invested in. And it's going to make you want to reread your Blue Beetle comics at the end of the day. That's what it's going to do most, is like remind you, man, these were great comics. I should go back to these. But you're going to want to go back to them for all that you preferred in them that was absent here. But on its own, Blue Beetle, not really your kind of movie. This one's rated PG-13 for sequences of action and violence, language, and some suggestive references. And those are all my thoughts for now on Blue Beetle. Now, if you want my weekly thoughts on the latest DC Comics, be sure to watch Essential Issues Weekly on this channel. You can listen also each week after the credits of the Christian Geek Central podcast, or listen to it all collected in the monthly Essential Issues podcast. As always, I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, subscribe, click the bell, do the things to stay connected, to share it with others. Really appreciate that stuff. I also really appreciate the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the benefits of joining over at patreon.com/SpiritBladeProductions. And then, as always, I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.